Welcome to Walk in the Shadows with me, your host, Tim Woolworth. This is episode 2 of the second series of our podcast, a series dedicated to exploring the mystery of psychic detective work. Hopefully you've had a chance to listen to the first episode in this series, where we began our exploration of the weird world of psychic detectives. We are going deeper down into the rabbit hole with this episode, with what would seem at first blush to be impossible. Imagine being able to envision major events before they happen, seeing exactly where a body is, even across the vast expanse of the United States, or being able to know how someone died by simply holding one of their bones. Better yet, having the ability to see major political events unfold long before they happen and give appropriate warnings to the politicians in question. I cannot imagine myself with such abilities, as they seem to verge upon the superpowers that are limited to individuals in works of fiction. Yet, the 2 psychic detectives we will profile in this episode could do such things with ease. By the end of this episode, it becomes pretty apparent that some people who walk among us can efficiently utilize a supernormal ability to see things that the rest of us cannot. If the following content intrigues you, and you need to hear more, there are bonus episodes in this series for our Patreon subscribers to listen to at their leisure. With all the topics we cover, the Walk in the Shadows bonus episodes expand upon the concepts in each season. For access to bonus episodes and several other perks, including free merchandise, please visit our Patreon. The link is in the show notes. If I may have one more ask before we get to the good stuff, like and subscribe to our podcast. If you really vibe with what we're doing, please leave a review and tell a friend or 2. It really does help. And now, let's dig deeper into the enigmatic mystery that is psychic detective work. Born in Wales in 1866, Arthur Price Roberts and his parents traveled to the United States, and the family wound up settling down in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, when Arthur was still but a child. As an adult, Arthur was a modest man who lived a respectable, quiet life. Yet there was another side to Arthur that set him apart from both you and I. He was blessed with a gift that helped him to solve hundreds of cases over the course of half a century. He had the supernatural ability to see things he shouldn't possibly be able to see with uncanny accuracy. The process by which Arthur came about his visions is unknown. He described the visions as impressing themselves upon him instantly and with amazing clarity when he sought them out in his subconscious mind. On rare occasions, this technique failed him, so he had to focus intently upon the desired information for it to finally emerge in vision form. Arthur relied so much upon his visions, as he had since childhood, that he was voluntarily illiterate. He felt that the images created in his mind through the process of reading would diminish the supernatural clarity to which he had access. I would like to note that none of the other psychic detectives we profile in this series was illiterate. In fact, the other psychic detective we will profile in this episode was the very opposite. Whether being illiterate helped Arthur or not, his abilities worked. Let's take the case of Duncan McGregor, a Wisconsin resident who had disappeared. Duncan had been missing since July. Widespread searching and large rewards for information yielded nothing. The location of Duncan was a mystery to everyone involved in the search. 6 months later, deep in the throes of a Wisconsin winter, Arthur was contacted by Duncan's wife to locate her missing husband. When she made the long journey from north of Green Bay down to Milwaukee, she was greeted at the door by Arthur. Looking her in the eyes, he told her he knew why she was there, citing McGregor by name before she had a chance to introduce herself. And he said that he couldn't provide any additional information at that moment. Being one of the rare cases where he did not receive an instant vision, he asked her to return later that day in the hopes that meditating upon her husband would reveal McGregor's location. After focusing intently, trying to pull the information from the ether for about an hour, he awaited Mrs. McGregor's return. When she did return, he had some grave news for her. Robert said that, "Your husband is dead. He was murdered. But I cannot tell you who was responsible for his death. Such testimony as I could give would not be admitted as evidence in court, and I would only trouble myself to give it. Roberts then proceeded to give a precisely accurate accounting of where McGregor's body was. He outlined how Duncan's corpse was in a river and mentioned that his body was trapped due to logs holding him underwater. And this was the reason he had not been located as of yet. With the information in hand, the police were able to locate the body with ease once they were at the spot indicated by Roberts. With Roberts' visions, the events he saw could happen within months or even years, or they could have happened in the past. The source that he pulled his visions from seemed to be timeless. For example, Roberts was walking down the street one day. He saw a man and was instantly struck with a vision so powerful that he was compelled to greet this complete stranger. "You are a fireman. 6 months from now, the Johns Manville plant will burn. It's going to be a bad fire. Better get out of the company or you'll be killed." He proceeded to tell the fireman that it would be a back wall of the factory that would collapse on a group of firefighters, and that the man he was speaking to on the street would be one of them if he didn't resign. As predicted, 6 months later, there was a fire at the plant and the back wall did collapse, killing 6 firemen. The fireman whom he had spoken to was not one of them. Robert's prediction during their chance encounter affected him so much that he began working a different job in an entirely different line of work. In addition to time not being an issue, neither was distance. J.D. Leroy of Chicago approached Roberts inquiring after his missing brother. The location of the body came quickly to him in a clear vision. He told Leroy that his brother had been murdered in Arizona and told him exactly where the body would be found, almost 1,800 miles away. After a few weeks, Roberts received a letter from Leroy. "I wish to inform you that we found the body of my brother within 200 feet of the place you described, in Devil's Canyon, Arizona. He was looking for mining property and evidently was lured there by parties who murdered him." Of the hundreds of cases he provided insight upon over half a century, the one that he is best known for happened right in his backyard, in the city of Milwaukee. October 26th of 1935 brought terror to the streets of Milwaukee. On that night, around 7:30, the quiet suburb of Shorewood was rocked when the city hall exploded, injuring numerous people. The human toll would have been much worse had the explosion occurred earlier when the building was occupied. The city hall had been reduced to ruin. The explosion was the result of dynamite being intentionally placed in a sewer directly outside the building. The subsequent fire that raged out of control reduced the building to flaming cinders. The next day, 2 banks were heavily damaged. First, it was the Citizens branch of the First Wisconsin National Bank. The explosion weakened the building's foundation, and glass blasted outward from the windows into neighboring properties. The second bank, an East Side branch of the same bank, was struck just 30 minutes later. The dynamite was placed close to a wall of the bank, and the resulting explosion damaged several cars. Once again, due to the timing of the terrorist attacks between 6 and 7 in the evening, a disastrous human toll was avoided as the banks were hit after they closed. 4 days later, on Halloween, 2 police stations were targeted, and they were struck in rapid succession just 11 minutes between the attacks by dynamite blasts between the 6 and 7 o'clock hours in the evening. Both precincts were heavily damaged, but mercifully, there were relatively few injuries. The Mad Bomber of Milwaukee had spread panic far and wide in the city. None of the institutions in town were safe. Everyone was waiting for the next foot to drop, as the police had no leads. During the ensuing scouring of the city for clues, one of the investigators, Detective Walter English, recalled a casual conversation he had had with Arthur Price Roberts a few days prior. As synchronicity would have it, Detective English was Arthur Price Roberts' next-door neighbor. On October 18th, a full 8 days before the first event, Robert's vision informed him that there's going to be lots of dynamitings. I see 2 banks blown up, and perhaps the city hall. Going to blow up police stations. Then there's going to be a big blow up south of the Menominee River, and it'll all be over. When Detective English told his superiors about the prediction, they asked Roberts to confirm what he saw, and he gladly did. Sunday, November 3rd, there will be a big one south of Menominee, and that'll be all. As you can imagine, the police were well acquainted with the visions that Roberts had. The police also knew that his abilities did have limits that were unfortunate for investigation. He could never identify the perpetrator, just the results of the perpetrator's actions. The police were stationed around the Menominee district on the lookout for a suspect. Then, the terrific explosion occurred, and it was heard up to 8 miles away. As predicted, Robert's big blow-up felt like an earthquake throughout the city. And also, as predicted, it would be the last dynamite event in the city by the Mad Bomber of Milwaukee. A sheet metal garage at 2121 West Mitchell Street was no longer standing, and in its place was absolute destruction. The Mad Bomber of Milwaukee, Hugh Frank Rutkowski, had accidentally detonated more than 40 pounds of dynamite when setting up his next attack, which according to the ransom notes he had sent to the police, was going to be a populated theater unless he received $125,000 in U.S. currency. Rutkowski had stolen over 150 sticks of dynamite a month earlier, about 3 weeks before the first attack, from the Estabrook CCC camp. Rutkowski had tried to obtain employment there a few months prior, but he had been rejected. At this time in history, the United States was in the throes of the Great Depression. The CCC camps, or Civilian Conservation Corps, was a New Deal program that put men to work to help stave off rampant unemployment. When he was rejected because of his bad teeth, he had nowhere to turn. He blamed the banks. He blamed the government. Rutkowski sought his revenge and tried to extort a significant amount of money in the process. Instead, the sheet metal garage where Rutkowski stored his dynamite was obliterated, as were the adjacent houses. Both Rutkowski and an accomplice, Paul Chauvinik, were killed instantly. Their flesh and bone rendered into bits that were strewn about so far that there were reports of flesh hanging on tree limbs. In total, only about 100 pounds of their mutual remains could be found and collected. These 2 criminals were buried in the same box, as individual identification was impossible. Unfortunately, a 9-year-old who lived next door lost her life, and 11 others were severely injured. The blast was so impactful that windows were broken in more than 100 homes in the vicinity of the explosion. Robert's visions continued, and he helped those he could until the end of his life, something that he saw in a vision. He told close friends and associates that the date of his death would be January 2, 1940, and that, "As much as I would like to remain, I will not be with you beyond that day." As predicted, he died on that exact date from a fatal heart attack. In deciding which psychic detective to finish this episode with, I decided to stay in the Great Lakes region and cover a psychic detective that was very influential. The Chicago Seeress continually made headline news across the United States, and especially in America's second city, Chicago, due to her uncanny ability to see the future. Irene Hughes was a psychic that lived in Chicagoland for a good portion of her life, and she worked with the police for decades. She was born into humble roots when she was delivered in a modest log cabin in Tennessee. She remembered having her clairvoyant abilities since her early childhood in this cabin. Hughes surmised that her abilities were likely passed down genetically from her grandmother, a member of the Cherokee tribe, who had a gift for seeing and reading coffee grounds. I lived on a farm in Salisbury, Tennessee, where I grew up. My father had been working in the attic, and he had a ladder extending up into a hole in the attic floor. I heard voices talking in the attic. I looked up, and at the top of the ladder was the most beautiful face in the world. And she said to me,
Irene, your head will be open. You will know everything, all of your life.
The creature smiled, motioning me up, and as I began to climb the ladder, I felt that I was floating. In the attic, there was a man standing beside the ferry. I knew instinctively that he was a spirit, not of this world. The two of them then told me I would see Lucy, the colored woman who worked for us, and she would give me some jewelry. They also said that I would receive a doll. Later that afternoon, I walked over to Lucy's house. She was sick in bed, and she said she wanted to give me some jewelry before she died. She gave me a string of brass beads, which must have meant a great deal to her. And the next day, two neighbor girls came over and gave me their doll, which they had outgrown. You know, those were just the sorts of signs that would have been appropriate for a 4-year-old. And then my mother encouraged me when I told her what had happened. She said that it was natural and good. Ever since then, I have actually known my own life and the lives of those around me. As an adult, Irene worked various jobs and gave psychic readings on the side. Eventually, her vocation and avocation met when she took a job in Calumet, just outside Chicago, writing an astrology column for the Calumet Index. Gaining fame, Hughes eventually moved to downtown Chicago in 1961 and opened the Golden Path, an office for astrology and psychic readings. She also had a classroom at the Golden Path that taught people who wished to develop or enhance their natural psychic abilities. While at her office, Irene Hughes made some stellar public predictions that came true, and as with most celebrity psychics, quite a few that were very wrong. Many of her early predictions were written down by the date of the vision in her diary, and she told only the ones close to her about what she saw when they were too sensational to print. One such example was a vision she had of President John F. Kennedy being assassinated, and that it would involve more than one rifle. She also wrote that JFK's assassination would invoke a conspiracy that would be prominent within 25 years of his death. Another event too sensational to print was when Hughes had a vision of Robert Kennedy being assassinated just days before the event. It was after this that she knew she had to inform people if she had these types of visions, and she did just that for all later predictions. Meanwhile, during the day, she continued to give readings and publish articles. There were many predictions that came true on an international scale, but it wasn't until she predicted a particular event that she became well known to the local Chicago public for the first time. She had a vision of the famed blizzard of '67 and the subsequent storm, to the exact day, about a month in advance, and she had published about it in her newspaper column. Shortly thereafter, the Chicago Seeress rocketed to national fame when she saw a vision of 3 men burning to death in a spacecraft. That spacecraft was Apollo 1. A fire ripped through the capsule during the countdown before a ground test, and astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee all tragically lost their lives in pursuit of knowledge for all mankind. Hughes had her vision 3 days in advance. She contacted NASA with her prediction and tried to persuade management to stop the test. Her prediction was not taken seriously. Now that she was well known for her predictions, people wanted to hear what she had to say. On June 9th, 1969, Hughes had made a prediction on a Canadian broadcast radio about an upcoming accident with Senator Ted Kennedy.
He will be involved in an auto accident on or near the water. His companion will be fatally injured, but he may not be injured.
As a result of this prediction, Iowa Senator Harold Hughes invited the Chicago Seeress to Washington, D.C. for lunch in the Senate dining room. The purpose of this lunch was that she could meet Ted Kennedy, who was aware of her prediction. In the middle of dining, Kennedy ambled over to their table. I told Kennedy that he will be involved in an accident on or near water. His companion will die, but he will not be injured. He said in a calm way, I feel that my family must have a curse on it. We talked for a few moments, and he returned to the table where he was sitting. Sitting at Kennedy's table during that lunch break was Mary Jo Kopechne. She was killed just 2 weeks later, on July 18th, 1969, when Kennedy's car careened off a bridge into the Ocean Strait by Chappaquiddick, Massachusetts. With her abilities, it wasn't long until the police reached out to Hughes to attempt to solve some cases. The Chicago Seeress gladly accepted the work and had a long, storied career working with police departments. Throughout the thousands of cases she participated in, she never accepted any form of payment from the police departments. Her gifts were her chance to really do some good in this world, and she viewed that as being priceless. I have worked on many cases. Once, a police captain called me into the office and asked me to work on a murder case. The sergeant brought in a box and took out a human skull. He put it into my hands and said in a gruff voice, "What do you get from that?" I answered, "A heart attack." The sergeant had been testing her. He then inquired about the murder case. I told him the name of the person who had been murdered, and it was the police captain's turn to almost have a heart attack. I indicated the name of the place where I felt the murders had been contemplated. The police did find a place by that name, and found it was where the murderer had contemplated the first of 5 murders. Her relationships with the police departments grew. This relationship was cemented when the former assistant chief of police of the Kankakee Police Department, Virgil Jordan, called upon Hughes to identify who murdered one of his police officers. Expecting a visit from the police, Hughes answered the door to 2 policemen who desperately wanted to find the killer of one of their compatriots. They laid out 20 photos of suspects on her table. What was unknown to Hughes is that several of the photos were of inmates already in custody for other crimes, so it was quite impossible for them to have committed the murder. As requested by the 2 officers, she grasped each photo and gave an individual reading on each one. She was able to glean a bit of information from each photo. Sometimes it was a personal detail, a crime they had committed, or even their name. The police were diligent in writing down everything that Hughes had said, and were simply stunned by her level of accuracy when they checked the notes for each photo. Hughes told the officers that they did not provide a photo of the person they were looking for in the murder case. They then provided another set of photos, and she saw a photo of the man they were looking for. He was already in custody as a suspect, and soon became an inmate when he confessed his culpability for the crime. After that case, Assistant Chief of Police Jordan said that, "I'm thoroughly convinced that she has a deep perception, something that comes to her from a supernatural source." This deep perception rose to the surface with a case that left Cook County Sheriff Lieutenant Jerry Harmon stunned. It was a windy, bitterly cold day in March when Harmon reached out to Hughes. They had been unsuccessfully looking for the body of a man who died in a shooting accident. Their best guess was that he was in the South Side Canal of Chicago. When Lieutenant Harmon called Hughes, she was able to solve the case over the phone. When she asked where they had been looking, Harmon said on the left side of the canal. Hughes replied, "No wonder you didn't find him. The body is on the right, way over there under some rocks. It is coatless, and one shoe is missing. He is wearing a white shirt. He will be found before Sunday." Hughes also mentioned that he had been shot in the back. The very next morning, a man walking the canal came upon the body exactly as Hughes had described it. The body was obscured by rocks, and it was found before the police had gone to the right side of the canal to search for it. Harmon worked with Hughes on several cases. In an interview before his death, he said that, "We worked on 8 or 10 cases together over 7 to 8 years. I think she was fantastic. On one murder case in 1968, she gave us the exact name of the killer. The Chicago Seeress had worked with various police departments on over 2,000 cases during her life before she passed in 2012. She once said that she had a wish that needs to come to fruition. I feel that there will eventually be a crime laboratory composed of psychics, and there will be a whole psychic force in the future working with the police. I really feel that the police are going to be far more open to this than they have been. Hughes once articulated her thoughts on how she can see events. We will begin exploring the theory behind psychic detective work in episode 3 of the series. Until then, I will leave off with how the Chicago Seeress, Irene Hughes, explained her abilities. You cannot control it. I have to try to not see things. Every event that has happened generates energy, and everything that will happen gives off energy too. Psychics are able to detect that energy. Everyone has this ability. Haven't you ever had a hunch? But people don't open their minds. Children have very pure images and visions of things because their minds haven't been contaminated by adults. They should be listened to. For the psychic detective to not see things must be one of the hardest things to accomplish when visions appear unannounced, whether they want them to or not. This episode was researched and written by me, Tim Woolworth. The final audio engineering and creative soundscapes are from my fellow explorer of the unknown, Joshua Shawn from 0G-ITC. Hopefully this episode made a little bit of our paranormal world more normal for you. As always, if you have any personal anecdotes, observations, or alternate explanations you would like to share on this or any other topic we've covered, or just maybe you would like to drop a note to tell me your experience, you can always reach us via our email, contact@walkintheshadows.com. Once again, that's contact, spelled CONTACT, @walkintheshadows.com. If you want to learn more about this podcast or myself, please visit our Walk in the Shadows website. The link is in the show notes. On our website, you can find our social media accounts, our mailing list, and our Patreon should you decide to support us. Your support directly helps us keep high-quality paranormal content delivered regularly to the podcast player of your choice. If you think what Walk in the Shadows offers is a valuable service for sating your paranormal curiosity, subscribe and review this podcast. And please, tell a friend or share on social media. It really does help. Most importantly, thank you for your time spent walking in the shadows with me. I know your time is valuable, so I really appreciate you being here in this moment. Until next episode, may you and yours be healthy, prosperous, and treated with kindness by everyone and everything you meet, both in the light and in the shadows.